be my girl. It's 1, 2, 3, take my hand and come with me because you look so fine that I really want to make you mine. I said you look so fine that I really want to make you mine.
Everyone, please welcome Kim Glas, Executive Director, BlueGreen Alliance, and President, BlueGreen Alliance Foundation.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning. First off, I just want to thank everyone for coming to our very first Clean and Fair Economy Summit. I know some of you traveled long distances, some of you traveled short distances, and waited in a lot of traffic yesterday. So apologies for that, but this is a beautiful setting, and we're really excited to host the conference here in Olympia. We have a great lineup of speakers today. We're going to have workshops, trainings, and networking opportunities for all of you. And I saw a lot of people were talking upstairs with coffee and talking earlier this morning at breakfast. We hope that you will come away from this summit having built some lasting relationships and with some great ideas on collaborative efforts moving forward across the environmental and the worker space. The BlueGreen Alliance Foundation is no stranger to conferences. In 2008, we hosted the first Good Jobs, Green Jobs conference that was held in Pittsburgh. And since then, we've held conferences all over the country with thousands of participants. But this year, we decided to be a lot more strategically focused with a smaller, more intimate event focused on personal stories, strategic trainings and workshops, and helping labor union members, environmentalists, environmental justice leaders, business leaders, and civic leaders build real connections and alliances that can last beyond this summit today. Because we're going to need to lean on each other in the coming years if we hope to build a better future for our country. So it's no secret for many of us in the room, our backs are against the wall. Every day there is more and more concerning news coming out of Washington, D.C. that creates enormous challenges for all of us. We thought deeply after the election as an alliance of how we were going to move forward. We decided the best way to understand what happened in this country in terms of the radical shift that took place in certain regions and pockets of the country was to go out and to listen to our members, particularly those labor union members that were struggling in communities that have seen deindustrialization. These are the very same communities that are facing the most exorbitant environmental challenges as well. We heard from people who are tired of seeing jobs lost overseas to nations that aren't held to the same environmental rules and worker protections that we have here at home. We heard about entire towns where people felt that their town had been dying, not just for the last couple years, but for the past few decades, because they relied on one industry and received little in the way of help to diversify their economies before it was too late. We heard from people who cared deeply about the environment around them and the legacy that we leave our children. There are people who understand that climate change is real. Every person that we talked to said climate change is real, and they know it's a preeminent issue of our time, but they want to address it in a way that creates a fairer economy for all. We heard from people that felt like they've been forgotten, that the world is passing them by and no one is looking out for their best interests. Workers who felt America's greatness has been built on their sweat and hard work, but they've been shoved aside in favor of special interests and big money. Those discussions helped us realize that now, more than ever, blue-green alliances are vital to the future of our nation, and that unless we fight to win now together, we'll be defeated separately. Even this event's name was built on those conversations. A clean and fair economy is what all of us are fighting for and what all of us must work together to realize. But we can't have a clean economy with subpar jobs with low wages, no job security, and dangerous working conditions. Nor can we have a fair economy where workers have good jobs, but their homes and communities are battered by unchecked climate change, are stuck with poisoned water, and face rampant pollution. We can and must have both a clean and fair economy if we are going to succeed as a nation. And the good news is that we know we can do this because it's already happening. Right now, here in Washington, California, Oregon, and other places around the country, great things are happening at the state and local level. And if we continue to build upon those successes, in the end, it will help us achieve our goal of a strong, fair, clean economy that works for all Americans. An economy that leaves no one behind and protects our natural world. So today and tomorrow, let's work together to find solutions to the challenges that we face. Let's forge new friendships and strengthen existing ones to take on the lessons we have learned in one city and bring it to our own, and share our own victories in the hopes that others will bring it back to their hometowns. Building a clean and fair economy isn't an easy endeavor, but it is one worth fighting for with everything that we have got. Again, thank you so much for coming. I would like to thank our sponsors and hope that you will support them like they are supporting this summit, as well as our steering committee who helped make this summit a reality. Remember, you can tweet, Facebook, or Instagram about the summit using hashtag #CFE Summit. Now I have the pleasure to introduce the co-chairs of the Washington Blue-Green Alliance, Jeff Johnson and Casey Golden. Jeff is the president of the Washington State Labor Council, and Casey serves as senior policy advisor for climate solutions. They've been both tremendous leaders here in Washington State for a clean and fair economy, and we are lucky to have them as co-chairs of the Washington Blue-Green Alliance. Casey and Jeff.
I like the rock and roll. Let's get this party started. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, BGA staff, who've been working so hard to put on this event. And Kim, it's so great to have you guys here. Thank you so much for choosing us. And a special thanks, everybody's been working really hard on this, but I want to give a special thanks to our Washington State BGA coordinator, who many of you have already met, Stephanie Selt. The beating heart of the work of the Washington Blue-Green Alliance, and a big part of the reason that we're moving forward so strongly together. It is my privilege to get to welcome you to the Washington where we get things done. They call this the Evergreen State, but in honor of this event, I think we're going to rename it to the Ever Blue-Green State. And when you picked the West Coast for this conference, I think they probably warned you that, it's we're a little more touchy-feely out here than maybe are back east, a little more sensitive. We like to talk about our feelings, so I want to tell you a little bit about how I'm feeling today. I am feeling incredibly proud, swelling with pride that you chose this place for the the National Blue-Green Conference this year, and I'm so glad to see so many of our friends from around the country, and I'm especially proud of the work that justified that choice, the ongoing work. I am super proud, Brother Guenther, of what's going on down in Centralia and the coal transition that's demonstrating what it looks like to make a healthy and fair transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. I'm incredibly proud of what we're doing on the Bellingham waterfront, as difficult and slow as it is, to try to rebuild a waterfront economy there with good jobs on a working waterfront instead of just succumbing to the market pressure to make it a playground for the yachting class. I am incredibly excited about the Hanford Solar Project, having spent some time out at Hanford myself. Another beautiful story in the making of transition in Washington. I hope Bob will tell us more about it. I am very proud of the work we're doing together on trade and on worker safety and on economic justice broadly. We cannot have a transition without a fair transition. And I'm proud of the way the environmental community is starting to show up in a bigger, louder way on those economic justice issues. And I am proud of the Alliance for Jobs and Clean Energy, which is forming now, led by labor and environmental interests, communities of color, social justice communities, and business to face up to one of our toughest challenges, which is to forge a winning climate policy together in this state. All of that makes me very proud. So I'm proud today, and I am also, I need to tell you, more than a little bit scared. I am scared about what is happening to our democracy. I'm scared about the concentration of economic and political power that is dividing us more and more into separate classes, separate races, separate nations. I am scared about what has happened in the last few weeks and what's continuing to happen in Houston and Florida, and who bears the brunt of those crises. I'm scared of the way the stranglehold of the fossil fuel industry on our national politics is setting the stage for more Irmas, more Harveys to come. I am afraid because on Saturday, I got a text alert for a level 1 evacuation notice, the lowest level evacuation notice at the cabin, my dream cabin in the woods in north central Washington that I've been building for the last 2 years. And I went up there and spent Sunday and Monday cutting and raking and reducing fuels wherever I could. It's past the point where you can use chainsaws now because we can't afford any sparks because it's so dry. And I came back down, and yesterday I got the level 2 evacuation notice. And I will be heading back up there after this conference to do everything I can, but I am afraid of which way the wind's blowing and how hard it's blowing today, and whether we're going to be able to save that place. I am afraid, sisters and brothers, that we are running out of time to do what we know is right and necessary. Dr. King famously said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But let's not forget that he also said there is such a thing as being too late. And I am afraid that if we do not get our collective ass in gear on this stuff, we are going to be too late. And that leads me to my third feeling, which is that I am extremely motivated and pumped up by what we're about to do here today together. I am so pumped that we have this time together now to show each other the way forward, fueled on by the work we've already been doing, by the belief that that work can flower now and offer us an alternative, offer us real, tangible, workable, fair, economically vital pathways to sustainable shared prosperity, to a clean energy economy, to real climate solutions at the scale of the problem. I am pumped that the people in this room are the right people, that now is the time, that today in this room is where we do it. I heard an interview with Rex Tillerson a little bit before the election, before they cut out the middleman between oil and government. And he was on a business show, and they were asking him about these investigations. You know, Exxon's under investigation now for knowing the truth about the climate crisis as early as the 1970s, continuing on their path, sowing a lot of doubt and false science about climate and paying for that to the point where they've now paid for a Congress that denies reality altogether, and where the chair of the relevant committee in the United States Senate actually comes to work in the winter with snowballs to disprove the theory of climate change, the hoax of climate change. And they asked Rex Tillerson on this show, he's chairman of Exxon at the time, what do you think about these investigations? Is this going to be a problem for you? Is it going to start to spook shareholders? And he kind of leaned back with that kind of J.R. Ewing, 10-gallon hat look on his face, and he said, well, people are always going to need what we sell. Sisters and brothers, the day we stop believing that is the day we really start to break free. It's true. It's the day that we set sail together for economic democracy, for taking our future and our democracy back, for building a sustainable shared prosperity, and for delivering a future that our kids can live in and deserve. And I will further submit to you, sisters and brothers, that today is that day, in part because we don't have any more time to waste, in part because that is what the Clean and Fair Economy Summit is all about. That's why we're having this. That's why we invited you. That's why we're doing it here. That's why we're doing it now. We are so grateful to you for being here and for making this vision real together with us. We can see it now. We know it's possible. And here's where we get to describe it to each other, to argue with each other about how it's going to work, to figure out the pathway to build the bridge and to do it together, because it's the only way we're going to do it. And so I am proud, and I am pumped, and I am not the least bit scared to offer you up our next speaker, the president of the Washington State Labor Council, the co-chair of the Washington Blue-Green Alliance, my dear brother, our fearless leader, Jeff Johnson.
Sisters and brothers, how are you? Excellent, excellent. So I want to thank Kim, I want to thank Stephanie, JB, Mike, for all you did to put this on, as well as the steering committee of the Blue-Green Alliance. And Casey, I want to thank you for your leadership, for your friendship. I've learned so much from you over these past 4 years or so. You know, you also used one of my favorite quotes from the Dr. Martin Luther King, and you know, the thing that struck me first when I heard that quote was that while the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, it's not because it's a law of physics. It bends because of you and I, community, labor, communities of color come together, and we're torquing that arc down towards social justice. So I want to say this. In 2011, our State Labor Council Convention passed a very controversial resolution. It passed a resolution having us support the Gateway Bulk Terminal up in Cherry Point, the northwest portion of our state. It was primarily to be a coal export terminal. It passed because building trades unemployment levels were still in the 45 to 50% range. It passed because that portion of our state that Michelle represents had seen a deindustrialization with the closing of the Georgia Pacific mill, and so they were becoming a service economy and a fairly low-paid service economy. It passed, and at the consternation of some of our big unions, I thought, wait a minute, this is kind of in contradiction to what we see happening out there in the world. So I was confused. I was determined to do something, and so I was introduced to Casey Golden through a common friend, another labor leader who is the head of AFSCME, Council 28 in our state, who's been a friend of Casey's for quite some time. After Casey and I met for a little bit, we decided that we would re-up the Blue-Green Alliance. There had been one in our state, but it had gone away. And for the first period of time, we had no staff. You know, it was basically a time to build relationships, and a very important time to do that. We had ground rules, which was there were certain topics that were like forbidden, we wouldn't talk about, right? We weren't going to accentuate differences, but we're going to try to find the sweet spots, right? A year or so later, we were able, through JB Tango and Kim, to hire staff, and that's Stephanie Selt, and she has made a world of difference to the organization and to our moving forward. And you heard Casey mention some of the projects, and I know Bob Guenther and probably Robin will mention them in more detail. But we also did something different as well. We created a blue-green committee to figure out what our state capital budget ought to look like, and we've done that for 3 legislative biennia, and it's been a great work in progress, and it really starts to align our priorities in a good way. We subsequently worked on transportation packages together, Sound Transit 3, the largest mass transit package in the history of our state. And also had wide spread support for our initiative to raise the state minimum wage and paid sick days. All of that's good stuff, and it's going to continue, and I want it to continue more, but I want to tell you, sisters and brothers, this is a time for labor in particular to be bolder, to have a bigger vision, rather than hunkering down to protect our own. We need to recognize as labor leaders that we are co-leader with communities of color, the environment, and other community organizations in building a broader social, political justice movement. And at the same time, protecting wages, hours, and working conditions is not an either or, we have to do both. You know, We're living in a time of great change, and I define it by three major trajectories. One, obviously, is what Casey just mentioned in a very personal way, an increasingly unstable weather, or the havoc wreaked by what we now know as climate change. I mean, we've got the South and the Southeast underwater. We've got the Northwest that's burning out of control. Climate change is impacting every single aspect of our lives, from water and food scarcity to forced migration in different parts of the world, to our jobs, to the impact on the survival of species, how tax dollars get spent, whether it gets spent to mitigate climate change or whether it gets spent on much needed social services, healthcare, long-term care, and the like. There's not an aspect of our life it doesn't touch. A second trajectory, and what I'm hoping is the last gasp of what I call a Sisyphean, that's a tough one, struggle. My son, who's a PhD candidate, was just home, right? So I practice these big words, because I don't understand half of what he tells me. But anyway, this Sisyphus-like struggle between Democrats and Republicans that has the basic value that the corporate economy is basically okay. We just need to tweak it to the left or tweak it to the right. And I want to tell you, that's just wrong. It's wrong-headed. The Trump administration, while at times it's ideologically very confusing, there is no doubt that he would have us return to the 1950s, a hard right turn. That's the second trajectory. The third trajectory is that we're undergoing a major economic and social transformation restructuring right now. I mean, accelerating automation in many of our sectors is leading to enormous job loss and de-skilling of workers. The rise of the gig economy has literally, though it's small, it's growing, it's severed the connection between employers and employees, totally putting all the risk on individuals and socializing the cost to society, while all of the profits go to the Silicon Valley gig economy, so-called entrepreneurs. I want to tell you, the robber barons of the 1880s, are just from their ringside seats in hell, they're just chuckling at the audacity of these new robber barons. And then finally, the financial and fossil fuel industries, as they invest in the alternative energy economy, they're trying to tap every single barrel of oil, every single cubic foot of natural gas out of the Earth's surface, regardless of what this does to our water aquifers, to human safety, or to climate change. So the great irony and the great secret in some cases is that these same billionaires that own these fossil fuel companies are the same ones that are funding the right to work movement to basically eviscerate workers' voices at work. They're the same folks that are funding voter suppression all around our country. They want to cut us off from meaningful employment and income, and they want to cut us off from a meaningful political voice. They want to keep us divided so that they can control the debate and the policy outcomes. This, brothers and sisters, does not have to be. Labor and community partners joining together can lead the way to an economic transition based on common values and based on a shared prosperity. President Kennedy, I think I was about 9 years old when he ran for president, and he had a vision, which was by the end of the decade of the 60s, we would land a person on the moon, right? Well, I want to tell you, sisters and brothers, we need a different vision right now, and that is by the end of the decade that we have to be in a race to save our planet while creating quality jobs. It's a much more important race that we're in than the space race. For labor, I'm going to suggest four things and then I'll get off. One is, we need to be very thoughtful and conscious about the way we invest our pension funds. For one example, we could invest them in deep dive energy efficiency in the industrial, commercial, public, and residential sectors. By doing that, we could decrease energy consumption, some studies say, by up to 30%, significantly reducing carbon emissions and creating generational jobs for workers. A second thing is we need to organize in the clean alternative energy economy. You know, sisters and brothers, it does not matter how many studies are out there that claim that there are more jobs created in the clean energy economy than the fossil fuel economy, because that doesn't do anything when fossil fuel companies stack up a bunch of bucks and agree to project labor agreements, and then you've got studies that say there are more jobs out there in the clean energy economy. It doesn't help. So this is an appeal to utilities, it's an appeal to the environmental community, it's an appeal to communities of color. You have to help us, labor, organize the clean energy economy companies, because there's a difference. If we create those jobs and they're not much better than minimum wage jobs, we have not done ourselves any favor. These need to be quality union jobs. But I want to tell you, and you'll hear more about the Alliance later on, if they run an initiative next year, and if it passes, and if we get $1 billion to invest each year, hopefully all that happens, it's not anywhere near enough, right? So I want you to think about this, and this is something we have to do together. Labor's not strong enough, environment's not strong enough, communities of color's not strong enough, got to do it together. We need to have some real financial leverage. We have to invest. You know, we used to use the term the Marshall Plan, right? For both political reasons as well as magnitude. It's not a good comparison anymore. We need something larger than that. We need to leverage finances on the level that corporate banks do right now for the clean energy economy. We need a banking principle, and what I mean by that is we need to create a public infrastructure bank, whether it's at the state level or regional level, but we have to be able, for every dollar in reserves, lend out 10 to make this transition to a new clean alternative economy. And then finally, we need a fair and equitable, just transition for all workers impacted by the transition away from fossil fuels, because workers and their communities will be impacted. And we can't allow market forces to just push them to the side. They have to be supported. Their income, their health care benefits, their pensions have to be supported. If they're close to retirement, they need a glide path into retirement without any fear. They need retraining dollars, they need peer counseling, they need advanced placement services to find new jobs in the clean alternative economy. For those that have served for a long time in their jobs, apart from wage and benefit replacement, they need wage insurance as well, so that for a significant period of time, their standard of living, their family standards of living does not fall and the community doesn't suffer in the process. Sisters and brothers, together, labor, community, environment, we can make these kinds of changes. I'm positive that we can do this. I'm so glad you're here for these next 2 days. Let's think hard on how we make this happen. Thank you so much.
Everyone, please welcome Bob Guenther, Government Affairs Advisor, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 77.
Hey. Well, I think it's a great privilege for me to be here today, but you're looking at an old Alaska plowboy right here. And I want to describe to you just what takes place from a place that I came from. As a boy, I used to feed my cattle in the morning. And when I had to feed those cattle in the morning, I fed them molasses. And that molasses came out of the barrel very, very slow. Today, with the environmental movement that we've got going and the labor movement that we've got going with the BlueGreen, we can't keep the damn molasses in the barrel. We better get with it because it's running out very fast. And as Casey said, we don't have much time, and we got to make sure that we do the job right. In 1963, I became a machinist apprentice. I worked in the machinist trade. In fact, I helped machine some of the building parts for the Twin Towers. The IBEW 77 Governmental Affairs Advisor, power plant mechanic at the Centralia plant for 34 years. And I worked on the collaborative decision-making process, where we brought Al Gore and Bill Clinton to town. And Al Gore said to me, you know what you guys with this collaborative decision-making process did in 2 years, what it took 10 years to do in the Grand Canyon. That's where I really started believing that collaboration was the way to go. And the example that we have here today with all of you and the privilege that I have to be here is so important. And without your help and without everyone's help, we could not attain or get to where we're going. You know, here a few years ago, I had the idea that IBEW 77 had a piece of ground over next to the Hanford Reservation. What are we going to do with that land? So I took this to a good company, Energy Northwest, and said, we'd like to present to you the opportunity to build a solar farm. And so on that 77 acres, the crux of it is that we're going to take 20 acres, or 20 plus acres, and we're going to put a 4 megawatt solar farm. But the point is, we're also going to have battery storage. We're going to have a UET storage. We're going to have iTech, hopefully iTech panels, and that will be 13,000 panels on that site, 4 megawatts. To begin with, there were companies that said, oh God, we can't sell the power. Well, it took a little while to get the off-taker. We have an off-taker. We have a smooth transition taking place, and hopefully in December or January of this next year, we'll start the process. It's 4 megawatts, 13,000 panels, and I'm just really proud of IBEW 77 to open their arms and rent that to the Regional Education and Training Center, which I am a board member of, and we're going to have 25 years of production there. We have had people like the University of Washington join us. We've had Energy Northwest, Patelco, Gary Tushy from Patelco. I went to Washington, D.C. with Gary Tushy. We told the Department of Energy, we'll build 200 megawatts on the Hanford Reservation. And the Department of Energy says, oh gosh, I don't know if we can't sign a contract for 50 years. Tushy said, well, then we'll sign one for 10 years. But what this project at Hanford is doing is it's giving us an opportunity to have a test bed. We're not going to go off willy-nilly. We will know what the data is that the University of Washington will collect, and hopefully we will take that data and we will use it in other solar programs that we've got. Battery storage, UET, Dr. Gary Yang has the right stuff. He has developed a battery that you can charge 20,000 times and it doesn't degrade. He's developed a battery that actually only loses from full charge in a full year, only loses 3%. That's unheard of. That's unheard of. Gary Yang doesn't have the money that Elon Musk has got to put out his lithium-ion batteries and all the information. They have a place. The lithium-ion's got a place. But UET's battery has a bigger place. I've talked to them about coming to Centralia. After we prove what we're doing over at Hanford, after we have a good proof of what's going on, I've talked to them about coming to Centralia and putting 100 megawatts worth of battery storage. The electrons, with all of the information and all of the work that we're doing putting out green energy power by solar and wind and whatever, we got to have a place for those electrons to hide. And what we need to do is put battery storage, pump storage, we need it all. So I just wanted to let you know. On your table, you have this piece of paper that shows what we're trying to do over there. It's old information. When I say it pours out of the barrel like molasses, do you realize it took 6 months to get this done so that Energy Northwest could say to me, well, it's no longer an initiative, it's a project. And now it's a project, and thanks to our governor, Gary Locke also helped, but thanks to our governor, Jay Inslee, and the Green Energy 2 Fund. You know, Jay Inslee, we're very, very lucky to have him. And we've got 2.5 years to get all the molasses out of the barrel, folks, because the governor is pushing very hard, and Jay Inslee is a guy that says what he means and does what he means. And I'm just so proud of what we've done with the Green Energy, Clean Energy 2 Fund. There's $3 million for a battery there, and there's 13,000 panels. And I'd like to close with this to give you a thought. A lot of people, and I don't totally understand horsepower, but a lot of people think about this. Just yesterday, I delivered a letter to TransAlta and drove the stake in the ground for organized labor. And what I said was, look, we've got a test bed going on over at Hanford. When you have your initiative, they have an initiative for 120 megawatts of power to put on that mine at Centralia, the North Mine. It'll be in Thurston County, by the way, if it happens. 120 megawatts. So I did a little bit of math. Now, this old Alaska guy may be wrong, but I had Doug Howell figure it for me, too. So, Doug, we said if there's 13,000 panels on 4 megawatts in Richland, how many panels will it take to do 120 megawatts? 585,000 panels. Now that's jobs. Those are jobs. 585,000 panels. But the rest of the story is we're going to continue on finding a place for that electron to hide. And that's with battery storage. And that's with pump storage. And that's with any other way we can store those electrons. So with that, I'd love to take questions. I hope that you read this pamphlet. Energy Northwest has been very, very good to work with. And I've told Energy Northwest, and I've told the environmental community, I'm about solarizing part of the Hanford Reservation. 10,000 acres. We put 10,000 acres of storage of solar on the Hanford Reservation. We will clean up the Puget Sound Basin. We'll clean up the Puget Sound Basin. And Jim Gaston, Vice President of Energy Northwest, said to me, "Oh, Bob, wouldn't it be great to cook the nuclear waste with the sun?" I said, "No kidding, it would be." So here we go, and we're not taking no for an answer. We're moving the ball ahead. So thank you very much for having me, and take care.
Everyone, please welcome Edgar Franks, Formación Cîvica Coordinator, Community to Community Development.
So, good morning, buenos días. I thank the BlueGreen Alliance for giving us the space here to share some of our thoughts, some of our stories from being on the front lines from the farm worker struggle here in Washington State. We recognize that there's many issues that are happening not only here locally, but all around the U.S., all around the world. Thoughts and prayers to the people in Texas. That's where my family is originally from. And the people that are dealing with the effects of Hurricane Irma. The people in Florida, the people in Cuba, like everybody that's been affected from the hurricane and the unjust climate that's forcing our people to migrate. We're talking about climate change. This is the real life situation. We're living it in real life. Climate refugees are happening right now. So it's up to us to do something about it, that we're in the position. That we have the luxury to be here and talk to one another. People from all over the world are looking for that bold leadership, and I believe we're part of that leadership right here by coming together and trying to find those solutions. So it's an honor here to be here with all you all. So a little bit about my background. My family, like I said, is originally from Mexico. I was born in Texas, the second person in my family to be born in the United States. We followed the circuit, what we call the circuit for farm workers, from South Texas in the valley. We migrated first to eastern Washington to cut asparagus in the 1980. And then from then, our plans were just to go back to Texas, but somebody said like, hey, there's more work in the other side of the mountain. So we moved up to Skagit County. And we continued this circuit from Texas to Pasco to Skagit County for maybe till I was 6 years old. And my mom was able to find steady work in Skagit County, so that's where I grew up in Mount Vernon. So shout out if people, I heard somebody, yeah. However, my family, we come from a poor family, so we couldn't afford childcare, so my mom would take me to work with her. First, she would leave me in the car, make sure I was okay, check up on me all the time. This was nothing rare. Hundreds of my friends were. That's how we grew up. We grew up in the field, going to work with our parents, and Eventually you get to the age where you can start working. So around 10 years old, we started working with my family full time over the summer primarily when we would be on vacation. And we were expected to produce just as much as the adults. So there was no childhood for us. When we go back to school in September, we'd hear about people going to Disneyland and they went camping, and then I was like, well, we didn't do that. We just went to work. And then, you hear all these things about like, well, if you work hard enough, you can be something, but in my family, we come from farm workers. We've been working the field since in Texas and Mexico and here since probably the 1950s. And we're still broke and we're still poor. So at an early age, my conscience started developing and asking questions of why things were the way they were. Luckily enough, we had a great community organizer, farm worker organizer, Cesar Chavez, that we heard about when we were going to school. So, and we were farm workers. He was a farm worker. He organized farm workers. So at an early age, I got the bug to find out and see how I can get involved in organizing with farm workers, since my family is farm workers, and made sense. So we started organizing marches in Skagit County, little marches, but they showed great solidarity. I'm pretty sure some of you helped organize or showed up to some of the solidarity marches there. That was when I was like around 14. I started getting involved with organizing marches. But conditions weren't improving in Skagit County or around the state. We did have a victory at Chateau Ste. Michelle, where workers organized and got a contract for the vineyard workers in Chateau Ste. Michelle. So if you buy wine, make sure you buy Chateau Ste. Michelle, because that's union wine. I'm pretty sure all of you all were involved with some of that boycotting and picketing that happened there also. So thank you all for participating in that and helping Washington State have one of their first farm worker contracts out there. My mentor and teacher, Rosalinda Gaylan, was one of the instrumental leaders in that fight. So I wanted to recognize her work and know that I wouldn't be here without her. But we didn't have a union in Skagit County. That was in Eastern Washington. So 3 years ago, 2013, summer of 2013, there was a big strike that happened in Burlington, Washington, in Sakuma Brothers Farms. And that's a farm there where many of my friends worked. My family never worked there, but many of my friends did. There was a huge corporation. So we were called in by the workers there to see what we can do. Coincidentally, we were in the position to start organizing in my own hometown, my own home county. And, in a hostile environment, if you know Skagit County and Burlington, that's not one of the nicest places to be a farm worker or a person of color. And especially if you're undocumented, if you're an indigenous person that doesn't even speak English or Spanish, to stand up to a corporation and say you're going to go out on strike until your rights are respected, that's a big step. So we joined that fight with Familias Unidas por la Justicia, stood by with them for over three and a half years of boycotting and picketing. So if all of you all didn't buy Driscoll's for 3.5 years and didn't eat strawberries, blueberries, or raspberries, we want to say thank you because you helped win the second contract for farm workers in the Washington State. Which is huge because Familias Unidas, my friend Ramon actually dropped me off right now. We are in the middle actually of another strike in Quincy, Washington right now. I think Brother Matthew stopped by yesterday. He's from the area, so we want to send a shout out for him stopping by the strike yesterday. So farm workers right now were on strike. They were able to negotiate something with their owner and are back to work right now. So hopefully we can keep this momentum going that started with Familias Unidas winning a contract, and it's now starting to snowball. When we were in Quincy, we started getting literally tons of calls from workers from every orchard, every part of the state, from Florida, from Tennessee, saying that these conditions that are happening from Washington are also happening in their place. So we know that this effort of farm workers, it's something historic and huge and something that we need to organize to win. That's the only way that we're going to do it. Taking risks like Familias Unidas, being undocumented didn't stop them, not speaking the language, but they were able to fight and we were able to follow their example. And you know, that's an example of how organizing and building these coalitions, why it's so important. That's why the Blue-Green Alliance is so important, because you're taking labor, environmentalists, and I know even where we're from locally, that's kind of like a point of contention a lot of the times, where we get environmentalists and labor fighting over a lot of things. If we start fighting amongst themselves, who ends up winning? It's usually the corporations and the people that want to keep us exploited. So that's why we believe in the work that the Blue-Green Alliance is doing. I wanted to also share that as farm workers, that we are on the front lines of not only labor fights, but also the fights for the environment. Even though we don't frame it that way, we fight against pesticides. If you really look deep down, pesticides not only affect our health, like when we're working out in the fields, but they're also hurting the soils, they're hurting Mother Earth, they're hurting the air. Methyl bromide, which is an ozone depleter. When we talk about fighting pesticides, we want to get rid of them because we know how bad they are. We're on the front lines of that. Case in point, right now, what's happening in Quincy. Another reason of why we want to be in this fight is because we saw the wildfires that were happening in British Columbia. A month ago, there was another strike that happened in a farm, Sarabanan Farms in Sumas. If you were there, you could see the smoke, the haze. You could smell it. 600 workers were working under these conditions. It was easily over 90 degrees, which is rare for the part of Washington that we're from. And if you were out there, it almost felt like you were inside a greenhouse that was easily over 100 degrees. And if you're in a blueberry field where you get no ventilation, it gets even hotter. And farm workers are put to work in these conditions and expect to produce in an inhumane capacity in order to keep their jobs. Farm workers, a farm worker got sick. He was denied medical care from his employer. He had to go to the hospital. His coworkers went out on strike because they knew the conditions his worker was living under, working under. They were experiencing the same thing, and they didn't want to see this to continue. They knew about the heat. They knew about the smoke that was happening. They went out on strike. These were H-2A workers, some of the most unprotected workers in the United States, guest workers, as we call them, or braceros. They went out on strike. Unfortunately, their compañero passed away a couple days later. And to me, there was no doubt that the heat had something to do with his passing away, also with the exploitation of the labor conditions he was living under. So it's a personal fight. Sorry. Okay. So we see people like Doug Erickson, whose farm is on the district where this farm worker passed away, saying that climate change is not real. Trying to pass laws that prohibit protesting, making it a criminal activity to protest. So farm workers, if their compañero passes away, can't protest. That's fascism. Let me get some water. Almost wrapped up. So it is our obligation to oppose people like Doug Erickson when they start passing this nonsense of us using our First Amendment right. The alt-right has taken up this fight about what is free speech. it's time for us to take that back and start exercising our free speech. When we see people using an amendment like the free speech to attack us, organizers, workers, people at Standing Rock, Black Lives Matter, that's unjust, and it's up to us in the labor movement, environmental movement, the farm worker movement to stand up and be on the side of the people that are the most marginalized and oppressed, the poor people. So, I wanted to send a shout out before I forget to Jason Holland. Where's Jason?
Yeah, Jason.
So if you can stand. This guy negotiated against a corporation, one of the best farm worker contracts in the whole United States. So thank you, Jason. The Labor Council, we got Ananda and Michael, compañeros from the fight from around the nation doing great work. Everybody in this room that has thrown down for farm workers and are ready to put in work. I want to thank you all. Big shout out from community and Familias Unidas por la Justicia that are out there on the work in the front lines, and hopefully we'll be able to change the system that's exploiting us all. So thank you all for giving us this space.
¡Sí se puede!
Everyone please welcome Beth Doglio, Washington State Representative, 22nd Legislative District, Campaign Director, Climate Solutions.
Welcome. Thank you, Edgar. Very moving. We support you in the struggle. Thank you for being here. It is a pleasure to be here with you to talk about blue and green and the alliances that we must make to forge toward a new future. One that courageously resists, persists, and creates a new paradigm. Just like all progressive-minded interest groups, the blue and green awoke on November 9th, 2016, to a nightmare that would begin to shape our daily work in ways that we couldn't even begin to fathom. A crisis? Oh yeah, you betcha. An opportunity? I think that it's still up to us to make it an opportunity, and I think we've only nipped at the edges of that opportunity when it comes to blue and green. We need to courageously grasp the opportunity to bring blue and green together, to persistently resist and create a future that embraces a steady, rapid transition toward a fossil-free future. I awoke on November 9th in a really bad mood and not that hungover, frankly, because I couldn't even party, right? I couldn't even have a drink. But I was in a really bad mood, and I was also a newly elected representative of the district that you sit in today. This is the 22nd Legislative District. Welcome to the district. Thank you for being here. I'd spent the last 11 years working at Climate Solutions. I'd worked tirelessly on an effort to create a cap-and-trade program during the early years of the Obama administration, to create and pass state and local policies at the state and local level in the Northwest that incented the development of clean development. I worked with unfair trade policy, especially over the last year or so, and also to stop the development of new fossil fuel infrastructure in the Northwest. And now I get to keep doing that, but I also get to be a voice in the legislature on these issues. And every day, I get to walk into the legislature and walk and talk blue and green. I serve on the Labor Committee, and I serve on the Technology and Economic Development Committee, where we consider a lot of clean energy policy. And I also serve on the capital budget. So it truly is this blue and green opportunity. What an amazing thing to get to do every day. I'm so privileged to be advocating for capital dollars, and we will have a capital budget. Damn it! And policies that create clean energy jobs while holding strong on prevailing wage and other worker protections. But the challenge ahead calls for more. It's no secret, everybody's talked about it that's been up here, that climate change is wreaking havoc. It is here today and it is here to stay, and it's only going to get worse. While the fires rage in the northwest and the waters and winds blow in the southeast, we have to ask ourselves, what path are we going to take here? Are we going to continue to bury our heads in the pockets of the fossil fuel CEOs making billions on the backs of workers? And now with Trump and these CEOs quite literally running our country? Or do we come together, blue and green, to resist and persist and create a future that is powered by non-fossil fuel resources that ensures a steady, rapid transition that doesn't just happen to workers, but has workers, their families, and their needs front and center? Jeff talked about it very eloquently, but that just transition, we so need to dig in. I come from a coal mining family, and I was back in Illinois. It's the Illinois basin near Springfield, where my folks were Italian immigrants. Well, my grandparents were Italian immigrants. My grandfathers were coal miners, and I was back there a couple of years ago for my mom's celebration of life. And my dad we were going around Kincaid, Illinois, where the coal mine was, and he was so excited to show me the coal mine. And I got to the coal mine, and it's a field of grass. It's gone. There is no more coal mine there. That's what a transition looks like. It's hard. It's not easy. Jobs get lost. And we have a responsibility to figure that out and to do it right this time, because we haven't done it right in the past. Patriot Coal totally screwed their workers in the end. And some of those workers were my cousins. That's me. That's my family. And I'm committed as a state legislator, and I'm so privileged to work with all of you today to figure that out. I'm committed to make it an issue in the Labor Committee to work on that. And just yesterday, Edgar, I was talking about pesticide drift and trying to figure out some pathway forward on that issue and other farm worker legislation in the state legislature, assuming that we're going to have a little bit more room to do things next year and the years that follow. I'm glad to be working on those issues. We had a hearing in Labor that was one of the most impactful for me. I was in tears after the hearing. It's hard to hear how farm workers live and are treated, and it's not right, and we're gonna change it, damn it. Those are the people that bring us food every day. When we pick up our heads and join our hands together, blue and green and purple and white and brown and every color but orange hair, only then can we resist and persist and win a future that is fossil-free with shared prosperity. And I so look forward to engaging with you, to have that privilege today, and having courageous conversations. That is my challenge. Let's have those courageous conversations today. They're not easy, but we need to have them because we can, we will, and we must. Thank you so much. Have a great couple of days.
Everyone please welcome Robin Everett, Organizing Manager, Sierra Club.
Hi everybody. So I have this speech, but I don't think I'm going to read it. You know, I was thinking as listening to my friends and colleagues here about how I grew up. I didn't grow up as an environmentalist. I have a lot of friends and family here in the Sierra Club, and lots of them did, and lots of them didn't, right? I was always taught that the environment was somewhere else. Right? It was the Amazon rainforest. It was the polar bears in the Arctic. It didn't have any effect on me. Right? Grew up in the desert of California, a lot of brown, a lot of dry. Just never really thought about the environment as being where I was. And it wasn't until I moved to a much more congested area in the LA area that I started to see, the environment is right here and we're having a huge impact on it. And I would say that the Sierra Club, in the 125 years that we have been operating, spent a long time thinking the environment was out there too. And we've done a lot to protect some really beautiful places. But I'm really proud of the work that we are doing now to try and address the environment right where we live. And that is about bringing good jobs. That is about protecting farm workers. That is about creating livable cities and places where people can move freely, breathe freely, work, and live in the communities in which they work. It is about stopping gentrification. It is about creating good jobs for people of all color and background. We have a long way to go, the historical white-led environmental movement. We got a long way to go before we really are walking the justice talk. But I'm proud that we're on the path. And it's times like these that I get really excited about what we can do. The BlueGreen Alliance here is such a wonderful example of putting those justice principles to work, really having those difficult conversations. Jeff says there's stuff that we just don't talk about, but we talk about a lot. And it's we're not always on the same side, but we really are figuring it out together, because we're not going to do this without each other. The environmental movement's been talking about climate change for 40 years, 30 years. Nothing's changed. It's only gotten worse. The alliances that we are now building with communities of color and labor, that is the only way we are going to actually tackle this problem. And it's not enough to just stop climate change. We have to build an economy that works for everybody. Every time we've had a big technological shift, it has only benefited the same people. Many, many people are left out of every time we have one of these shifts. We can do this one differently. We know better now. We're in charge of this. And I'm really looking forward to the conversations that we have over today and tomorrow, trying to figure out how do we usher in a clean energy economy that actually protects people, lifts up all boats, puts people to work, protects the communities that get impacted the most. These are not easy. It's not easy stuff, right? But I think that this is the kind of group that can make that happen. And I'm looking also forward to hearing about success stories. We have a lot here in Washington, but I know that there are many others. And honestly, the stories of failure too. We can learn lessons from that. And I just hope that we all really put all of our energy into these next 2 days and take back home what we have learned and share it with others and really start to spread this movement across the nation. Thank you.
Everyone please welcome Gaylan Prescott, Subdistrict 3 Director, United Steelworkers, District 12.
morning, everybody. So, Subdistrict 3, United Steelworkers, what's that mean? Unions all give their staff various titles, and none of them really translate outside the little circle inside the union. So the subdistrict that I have responsibility over is Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. I service a number of the plants inside that subdistrict, including all the assignments in Alaska and Hawaii. So I literally have the best job in the United Steelworkers. Nobody else goes to Hawaii and Alaska. I also get Hanford, and I get Eastern Idaho, INL, and the Simplot plant in Pocatello. So some other real great assignments. Our workers I'll speak specifically about Subdistrict 3, but we represent just a host of folks in industries that have oftentimes been at odds with the environmental community. We've got the refinery workers here in this state, a number of them. We get a bunch in California as well, even more. But in this subdistrict, we've got the folks in Anacortes at Shell and Tesoro, and the folks at Phillips 66. The refinery in Cherry Point remains non-union to this day, so we sore topic with us. We'd love to organize them. Kind of touching on the importance of just transition when we talk about those types of industries. We've got the folks in Alaska up on the North Slope, the folks that work for BP up there, that are pumping crude oil out of Prudhoe Bay, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in conditions that would scare even the hardiest 1900 trapper. I mean, it's difficult living up there, and those folks manage to do that difficult work. Again, at odds with the environmental community, you would say. I'll tell you, the folks up on the North Slope, a good friend of mine, he's leader in the local union. He goes home and plugs his Nissan Leaf in every day. That's the only car he owns. It's the only car he drives. So, when we talk about steelworker members and steelworker activists, it's important to remember, just because these folks work in industries that have oftentimes been at odds with the environmental community, they are not adverse to more progressive thinking along those lines. We've got brick manufacturing over in eastern Washington. We've got folks that work in the pulp and paper. In fact, we're the largest pulp and paper union in the nation. No other union comes close to representing the number of folks that we have in that industry, an industry often at odds with the environmental community. The titanium manufacturing that is in the Albany area of Oregon, we represent those facilities down there. These are big facilities that have oftentimes been at odds. If you drink beer or wine, we represent the folks that manufacture glass bottles. So good news, tip a beer for our brothers and sisters that work in that industry while you're here in Olympia. We've got phosphate fertilizer manufacturing plant in Idaho. And J.R. Simplot, not exactly a history of being a great environmental leader, but things are changing. The aluminum industry is one I wanted to talk about a little bit, and the great relationship that we've developed with Kaiser. It goes back. Our Kaiser relationship in my history goes back quite a ways. It really was the first time I had an opportunity to think about the labor movement's relationship with the environmental community. David Foster was the director at the time. We had a strike going on with Kaiser Aluminum. Kind of an ill-conceived notion by some folks' estimation, and an absolutely necessary endeavor by others. It was a long 22 months that we went to battle with Kaiser, and during that time, they were owned by Maxim Corporation. They had a fairly I don't know how to say it. Not a guy that we really liked. So we were warring with him. I committed not to cuss, so I'm not gonna say that. But he actually owned Pacific Lumber, so we decided to go down to Humboldt County and see if we couldn't find out what was going on with his little business down there and see if we couldn't align with some of the environmental activists in that area, in the Redwoods. And before long, Dave Foster, the director, the guy that hired me, the guy I worked for at the time, was in a redwood tree with a lady named Julia Butterfly, and we were off and running with kind of the next festivities being the WTO and in Seattle and that type of stuff. So it became apparent to us that this kind of an alliance with the environmental community is absolutely not only in our best interest but critical for our future. So, and that, many of you have probably heard that story by other folks, articulated much better than I, but it's been the genesis. I go back, I sat on the board of the Alliance for Sustainable Jobs in the Environment, and Jim Johns being the executive director, and Dan Leahy, many of you probably know him as a Northwest figure, great guy. We've been involved, the union's been involved in this kind of endeavor even before the Blue-Green Alliance was put together. So, and when the Blue-Green, it's not been without our trouble. When the union talks about our relationship with the environmental community, one of the kind of critical moments was an announcement that we had formed kind of an alliance with the Sierra Club. I immediately get a call from my new boss at the time, was Terry Vaughn, says, you need to get to Eastern Idaho. The folks in INL are about to revolt because the Steelworkers are now aligned with the very organization that wants to eliminate nuclear power from the face of the planet. And that's, kind of what they rely on out at INL. So I headed out there, and we kind of went back through the history and explained to them what was going on. This has not been without its bumps in the road. For those of you in the environmental movement, don't think for a minute this has not been difficult and without, some hurdles for us to clear. It's absolutely, in our estimation, necessary, critical, going to continue. This is not in any way, a critique of that endeavor, but do understand, I heard a comment about politics. We had a huge number of our members defect from the kind of international endorsement in the last election and voted for our current president. We've been working for the last 8 months trying to figure out what went wrong there and trying to heal that up. It was a horrible breakdown in communications. That same kind of breakdown can translate to our relationship with the environmental community if we are not very careful and very diligent about communicating and framing the issue correctly and not letting others frame it for us. So take you down kind of brief history back in time. I came out of the aluminum industry. I worked for Reynolds Metals Company for 20 years. My dad worked for him for 37 years. My wife worked there for 15. My brother put himself through college, got his doctorate by working at the plant Summers. It's a plant that no longer exists. That industry is virtually gone. In 2000, the aluminum industry in the Northwest, kind of I think the most beautiful area of the country, right here, it employed about 10,000 folks. We represented almost all of them. We had 11 plants in the Northwest. They're called primary reduction plants. Most of you probably know them as smelters. My dad would slap me if he heard me call them a smelter because, well, it sounds dirty, and God knows it's clean to make aluminum. Those plants were running at 100% capacity in 2000. They were all up and running, all 11 of them, employing everybody. Pumping, well, just the plant I came out of put about $90 million a year just into the federal budget because that's what they paid for power out of the BPA, the Bonneville Power Administration. Most of these plants got their power by virtue of the Bonneville Power Administration. They were buying hydropower at rates around $23 a megawatt. In 2000, we had a low water year. There wasn't a lot of snowpack. There wasn't a lot of precipitation. Bonneville had to meet its statutory obligations to provide energy to the private utilities and the public utilities, so that you all could have, lights and your wells would pump water and your air conditioners would run and your heat would run. So companies like Enron had successfully deregulated the generation of energy in the West, and they decided that they would take advantage of this kind of climate anomaly at the time, this low water year, a little bit of a drought, and they would take some of their generation offline. Now, they didn't do it. I don't know whether they did it, colluding with each other or not. I guess that's an open question. I don't think it really is open. They took the generation offline, and they did it in a way that took power prices where it's generally measured at the at the California-Oregon border. And those power prices went from in the mid $20 a megawatt to over $600 a megawatt on the spot market. You can't do anything at $600 a megawatt. You can't pump well out of your, well water to get a glass to sit at the dinner table at $600 a megawatt. It's just too expensive. So the BPA had to figure out what to do. They were overcommitted to cell power. They didn't have enough generation to meet the demands they had committed to because they had no water in the Columbia system. So they went out and cut deals with the aluminum industry. And by March of 2001, the industry that had been running at 100% capacity was decimated. Only a couple survived that, Alcoa in Wenatchee and Alcoa's plant in Ferndale. The Ferndale plant remains running today. The Wenatchee plant is mothballed and may or may not start, we just don't know yet, in the future. The other 9 facilities are literally gone. They're not just shut down, they're no longer in existence. They've been razed for the most part. 10,000 folks thrown out of work overnight. There was no just transition. There was no planning. The environmental community and the industry were often at odds about, fish restoration and using, water to move smolts down the river rather than generate power, and whether or not money should be used out of the Bonneville budget for things like, insulating homes and other conservation efforts. And of course, the industry was always opposed to that. We didn't work very well as a community in the labor side to try and figure a path through that made sense for workers, frankly. We failed. We failed our members. We failed those 10,000 folks that got thrown into unemployment. It was, I was speaking to Stephanie Salt last night, it's probably one of the most difficult times in my career as a steelworker is watching a plant that I worked at, 1,000 folks, friends, family, go from, typical arguments with the employer about whether or not I got the right upgrade yesterday, and we're going to war over 25 cents an hour, we're going to shut the place down, to literally turn the lights out, you're gone, you're going home, maybe we'll get you some Trade Act benefits and get you retrained as a CNA. That experience has informed me particularly, and many of our members, as to why we need to figure a better path forward in working with the environmental community and planning for a just transition so that when these jobs, if they go away, and some of them almost certainly will in the very near term, how are we going to care for those folks, those families, those communities? I would ask you to look at the communities that used to have aluminum smelters and see where some of them have landed. Goldendale, Washington is a good place to start. We didn't plan well, and it's critical that we do that going forward, and it's why the Steelworkers remain committed to this alliance and making sure that we move forward in a way that makes sense for our members and our folks. Now, there's a bunch of prepared comments, and I didn't read any of them, so I really appreciate the folks who put these together, and should I introduce Stephanie at this point, or are you going to do that? I've got an introduction. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of our panel discussion, focused on how and why labor and environmental groups are collaborating to push for climate solutions that protect our health and environment and create and sustain quality jobs. The moderator of the panel is Stephanie Selt, the Washington State Policy Coordinator for the BlueGreen Alliance, at the BlueGreen Alliance. She unites her background in economic justice and workers' rights with her interest in environmental and climate policy issues to help build a clean energy economy. And thank you.
Is it done making that noise? Hi, everybody. Thank you, Gaylan. We're running a little bit behind schedule, but we're going to delve into this panel discussion to give you guys a little bit of a taste of what some of the collaborative work that we do, how it has come together. And so I hope you guys will hold off on your lunch for just a few extra minutes for this, because I think it's going to be worth it. And we know that there are lots of areas where business, labor, and the environmental communities can come together and find common ground and find solutions to climate change and our environmental challenges in ways that benefit our economy and our workers. And we have to do that, we have to build relationships and we have to build trust. And one of the areas where we have managed to do that and to find some common ground on the West Coast is around conversations about putting a price on carbon emissions to address climate change. And today our panel is going to talk about how these relationships were built, the collaboration needed to achieve the goal of enacting an effective and equitable climate policy, and some of the ancillary benefits that they see from this kind of collaboration. And I think it may be that these folks are going to make it sound really easy, because they do. But I'll tell you a secret, and you've heard it already this morning. None of this collaborative work is easy all of the time. But when we invest time and we listen to each other and we work at it, we're able to get there. And so we wanted to show you an example of some of that this morning. So I'm going to start off the conversation by introducing our panelists here. We had one slight change from who's in your brochure. We're having today Edgar Scott, who's the Senior Environmental Engineer for Kaiser Aluminum. He's lived his entire life in the Pacific Northwest, has over 30 years of experience in manufacturing management and environmental engineering management, and has spent 27 years in the pulp and paper industry. Dan Wilson is the president of USW Local 338 in Spokane, and he represents 1,100 members who work in heavy industry and is a longtime member of the Washington State AFL-CIO. He's been a union member since 1973. Dan has worked in the power industry as a licensed millwright and operator with hydroelectric, gas turbine, and coal-generated power plants. He's been employed by Kaiser Aluminum for 33 years. And Vlad Gutman-Britton is the Washington Director for Climate Solutions, which focuses on building a thriving, equitable Northwest powered by clean energy and inspiring the transition to sustainable prosperity across the nation and beyond. Vlad has deep experience in policy advocacy and campaign politics, and is responsible for guiding policy development and building an integrated communications, advocacy, and government affairs strategy to foster a clean energy economy in Washington. So, just to get started, I wanted to ask everybody here this question. So it's not always or even often the case that you can find business representatives, union leaders, and environmental organizations communicating regularly and working to identify common interests. However, the example of Kaiser Aluminum, USW 338, and Climate Solutions gives us a pretty unique example of where this has brought people together to work more closely than they have in the past. Can you tell us the story about how this came to be the case?
Okay, so I'll kick us off, Stephanie, and thank you for having us. So up until a few years ago, Kaiser, when it came to legislation and when it came to political activities, had a strategy of lay low. You don't want to be seen, you don't want to be known, you don't want to be heard. And so that all changed though in 2015 when the governor came out with the Carbon Pollution Accountability Act. And that's when Dan Wilson here, who is president of our local union, he reached out to senior management at Kaiser Aluminum, and he suggested to them that they get engaged on carbon and carbon policies, because there was concern that it could have a negative major impact on our plant. And so luckily, Kaiser management heeded Dan's suggestion, and shortly thereafter, we decided, Kaiser and United Steelworkers, we decided to join efforts and to collaborate with each other and to have potentially have an influence on carbon policy in the state of Washington. And the reason why we did that was mainly two reasons. Number one was that we saw that there was common interest in carbon principles or common principles with regards to, we want to make sure that there's no leakage of carbon emissions, and we want to make sure that there's no leakage of good paying manufacturing jobs from the state of Washington. Those were the foundation of our principles. The other reason why we decided to collaborate with each other was because we realized that our sphere of influence and our ability to impact the process over time had a higher likelihood of success if we collaborated together and had common principles to communicate outside of us and with stakeholders outside of Kaiser. So we did that. And part of that policy was that we went out in the state of Washington and we actually collaborated, started building relationships with people who we felt were going to influence carbon policy in the state of Washington. And so we met with the governor's office, we met with people in the legislature, we met with people who are leadership in the environmental community, and one of those individuals is Vlad with Climate Solutions. And so we reached out to Vlad because we knew he was willing to hear our story, hear the Kaiser story as it related to carbon policy, and we knew that he was going to influence carbon in the future in the state of Washington. So at the end of the day, what our objective is that we know we've done a good job of building relationships, we know we've done a good job of collaborating when stakeholders like Vlad and people in the governor's office or legislators, the first manufacturing entity that they think of when they want feedback or want impact on carbon policy, we want them to reach out to Kaiser and United Steelworkers for input.
Well, I would have to say that back in 2013, after attending the governor's climate workshop in Spokane, it was apparent to me that no individual group out there had all the answers or the ability to solve all the issues around carbon. And so, as Edgar said, I contacted Kaiser and we had a lot of discussion over carbon emissions, potential regulations, new regulations, and the impact that would have on the local economy and jobs. At the same time, we had a representative from the Steelworkers sitting on the governor's carbon task force, which Climate Solutions also sat on. So we already had a relationship with Climate Solutions, and we had been in discussions. I had gotten a hold of Jessica Coven, who at that time was involved with very heavily with Climate Solutions. We had a lot of discussions. We had a lot of disagreements, and as it turned out, we really had a lot more in common than we had differences over. And at the same time, I think we got a hold of Stephanie here, and so, you know, this group that we were working with got bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, you know, we made a lot of contacts with the legislators here in Washington, the governor's office, several other environmental groups. But it's been a very, very interesting couple of years here, and I really think we've accomplished a lot. I think that overall, you know, we understand that we're never going to agree on everything, but you know, we can at least work together, and we can try to make the things that are within our power work if we can do that. And to me, this is just the beginning of a journey. We still have a long ways to go.
I guess I'd just add that some of what Edgar was talking about is really the shared starting point, that we don't always agree on everything, but there are things that we have in common. Using less energy is good for the climate. Energy efficiency investments are good for the climate, but they're also good because they reduce the company's energy costs and leave more room for other investments and upgrades of the plant and for workers and the like. And so having that kind of basis as a shared starting point is understanding of what brings us together has made it possible for us to work on the front end on policy instead of on the back end. And we saw in the past what it looks like when we don't do that in this state. In 2016, Initiative 732 went to the ballot with a carbon tax, and they went to Kaiser after the policy was done. They went to Kaiser and the Steelworkers after the policy was done, when it couldn't be changed anymore. And the result is that it was a policy that didn't work for that company and didn't work for other companies. And we know that if we can work together on the front end and draft those things together before they're filed, before they're moving through the legislature, it doesn't mean we'll always agree, but we're fundamentally going to start closer together than we would otherwise. And I think the last thing I'd say is that the environmental movement sometimes does a pretty decent job promoting solar and wind and battery storage, and as Bob said, there's a good reason for that. There are thousands of jobs if we make a commitment to renewable and clean energy as opposed to if we double down on fossil. But what we don't necessarily always do a good enough job at, and what we're talking about, I think, at this conference is what about the businesses that have been here for years and that we want to keep here. What Kaiser and other businesses show is that in a lot of cases, clean business is good business. And making sure that we can craft policy that aligns all of our incentives and moves us all in the same direction is only possible if we're talking regularly, early, and until it's done.
Awesome, thank you guys. Was this? I think mine's still on.
Just for me though.
I think so. How would you guys say that your perception of the amount of common ground between your constituencies, how has your perception changed over time about how much you really have in common?
I guess I'll go first. I think the common ground was always there. I don't think we did as good of a job as we probably could have at having communication and dialogue and collaborating about what that common ground was. And so I think that it was always there. I know that leakage of carbon emissions is something that's important to Vlad, and I know that nobody wants to see good-paying manufacturing jobs leave the state of Washington, especially when the employees that are completing that are involved in the jobs are clean jobs that are producing aluminum, which is part of the solution, that lightweighting transportation vehicles in the future.
The United Steelworkers is the largest industrial union in North America. We have 850,000 members. We've always been concerned about environmental issues. Matter of fact, we were involved with the writing the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act of 1970. We don't believe that we should have to choose between a clean environment and a job. We think we can do both, and by reaching out to Climate Solutions, BlueGreen Alliance, businesses out there, I think that we're beginning to move that ball. We're beginning to have some very, very good dialogue. I don't think that we're there yet, but we're getting there.
We're not there yet, but we're getting there, and the difference between our dialogue, I think, and other sectors has been, the real proactiveness of the Steelworkers and the real proactiveness of Kaiser, and our desire to reach out and. I'm here from Climate Solutions, but it's not just me. Washington Environmental Council, other folks also proactively reach out, and so we all decided that we're going to do that, and that's made the difference. Even if some of the policy positions are not identical still.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are some of the main benefits that you have seen as a person, as an organization, in this kind of collaboration?
I think it's always good to sit down and have dialogue and collaborate with people that have different opinions than you. You may actually pick something up, you may actually learn something, and that could potentially impact one of your principles or your perspective on something. So I think going in with an open mind and being willing to potentially learn something new is important if you want to be a good collaborative partner.
20 years ago, I would never have imagined that I'd be sitting here today. I think our thinking on these things evolve. And certainly mine has, and our members, positions on this has evolved tremendously. But there again, I still base everything on no single group or no single person has all of the answers or the ability to solve all of these problems on their own. We are going to have to work together. I don't think that everybody is going to get everything they want. We're all going to get a little piece of what we want, but we're going to have to work together to determine what that is.
I think the benefit for us is very clear. I mean, I'm an advocate, and I think I know some stuff, but I certainly am not an expert in the aluminum industry. I'm not an expert in the cement industry and pulp and paper and steel. And we create better policy, we create better recommendations if we work with people who are in that space, with workers who understand how policy is going to impact them and their livelihoods. And I can come up with some pretty good ideas every once in a while, but they're going to be better if they're vetted and fixed and repaired and stress tested by the people that are actually impacted by them.
Yeah, and personally, I've definitely learned a lot from getting to go to Kaiser Aluminum and see your plant out in Trentwood, Spokane area, and recommend to other people too. Try to get yourself a tour there one day. It really is an eye-opening experience. Sure. Just one last question. What recommendations do you guys have for other people who are trying to enhance their own work to work across different constituencies more effectively?
I would say that if you want to be a good collaborative partner, you can't just show up at the table and just say no. Say no to everything. Yeah. I mean, that's not collaborating. That's that's a waste of everybody's time. And so I would say, like I think I said earlier, is have an open mind. Be willing to expect to learn something that you didn't already know, and be willing to be flexible because you might learn something that might make you change one of your principles.
Yeah. I think all long-term successful relationships are built on honesty and open dialogue. And I've come to appreciate the openness at the Climate Solutions, BlueGreen Alliance, the people that we're working with, the open dialogue, the honesty there. It's really tough to develop the relationship that you need to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish if you aren't going to at least do that. So I say build it on honesty, good faith, and open dialogue, and don't take your ball home just because somebody says something that you don't like.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, being transparent, being open, and just not being afraid to disagree sometimes.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Well, I think we're going to call it a day for this discussion, but obviously it's just a small sample of the kind of discussions and collaboration that the BlueGreen Alliance and all of you are involved in every day, and that we're going to be digging into more for the rest of today and tomorrow. So I'm just going to give you a couple of logistical notes before we can move on with the rest of our day. We are a teeny bit late, but lunch, that just means lunch is ready, so that's good. So it's going to be served out there in the hallway, and I think people are going to come and just tap on different tables and let you know when to go out and get your food so that it's not a big stampede. If you're going to the Center for Story-Based Strategy session, that is going to be a working lunch session, so grab your plate and then move to the state room. That's where you're going to be eating and getting started there. Everybody else is starting at 1. Breakout sessions are going to be taking place starting from 1 o'clock until 4:45. We'll have the room names up here on the board, so look out for those. Tonight, the BlueGreen Champions Awards reception begins at 6:30. We're going to have music and food, and then the award ceremony itself begins at 7:30, and we invite you to stay and mingle and hang out and continue to build relationships. We'll be hanging out till 9:30 at least. Then you can carry on partying in the bar or something. Anytime today, we invite you to check out the photo booth area. We set up a little table in there to try to do a little bit more mini storytelling. So write down a message on one of the dry erase boards, take a selfie, and share it on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The hashtag you can see up here is CFE Summit. And I think that's it. So please eat and enjoy the rest of your day and tomorrow, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you, guys.